Up for questions, and as I said before, you may feel free to ask a question from where you are seated. I think we have some microphones that might be circulating. And then also feel free to write down a question if you'd like, and we'll look forward to hearing more from each of our panelists. So I'm going to start the questioning by touching upon something Judge Werren mentioned, and also something that I mentioned when I introduced Judge Stormer, and that is to ask the panelists what is meant by therapeutic jurisprudence, and how does it differ from traditional ways in which a case is handled or decided? And Judge Stormer?
You're on the end.
Okay. Well, therapeutic jurisprudence is a concept that was developed starting in the 1990s, and it was actually in California. Peggy Hall, I think was her name, was the one who came up with the concept. At any rate, it says that for every person who appears in court, there is a moment where you can have a therapeutic effect. So instead of looking at two people fighting through lawyers talking, you bring the person who is actually going to be adjudicated before you, and you have a chat with them. And when you see the courts, it actually feels like a chat. Would you agree with that? It's more of a little conversation with someone who's been charged with a crime, as opposed to a lawyer speaking for them and taking action. They're called upon to take responsibility for themselves and the next steps in the program, and when they come back for these chats, which are usually, as Judge Werren has said, done on a periodic basis, you earn the right to have fewer chats. You're called upon to tell us what you've been doing. Have you been using? If you admit it, it's a lot better. Have you not been taking your mental health medication? It's a lot easier if you tell us up front. So it doesn't feel adversarial at all. It's a collaborative effort, recognizing that each time a person can appear before a judge using the Black-Robe Effect, you can have a therapeutic moment and it can actually affect their change for the better.
And what is, yes, Judge Loftus.
If I might offer, in California, we've taken this another step, and the way we have looked at it is that you try and figure out why the person got there in the first place. And we've expanded this concept not only to mental health courts and drug courts, but to other courts as well. Family court, for example, sometimes when the people come to family court with a dispute, there's an underlying reason why they're there. It could be mental illness, it could be drug addiction, it could be something else. But the role of the therapeutic court is to figure out why the person is there ultimately, and if it's for one of those reasons that we can do something about, to keep them from coming back. Because the idea behind a therapeutic court is to get to the reason they're here and see if we can address that and keep them out of the justice system as best we can.
If I could just add, that's one of the reasons our other word is problem-solving court.
Right.
Right, so we use those interchangeably.
What are the eligibility criteria for the mental health court participants? And I know that you've worked on different courts. So if we could give the audience an idea of the different criteria for instance, juveniles, or the in the municipal court, in the common pleas court, each of those different courts, and then of course the New Day Court that Judge Stormer just started a couple of years ago. Please talk a little bit about the criteria.
Why don't you do that?
All right. So in our court, the criteria for mental health, you need to see a professional. It's really just diagnosis based. I think most of you probably work in the field. You have those diagnostic codes. What's their code? And that's, for whatever it's worth, is kind of what drives it, and funding drives it. If you don't have the right code, you don't get the right funding, and we have to be funded as well. And our mental health professionals are extremely good at that. They know how to get the right diagnosis. Not that they're fudging anything, but they understand where the diagnosis code means, what the criteria they're seeing meets for that. As far as we're concerned, in municipal court, you have a municipal court crime, you can be placed on, you can be sentenced for it, maybe you have a record and you can go in on probation. Okay, instead of typical probation, you're into this mental health court because you have that diagnosis. We believe there's something that can be done. Or you can also track into it. Maybe it's your first time. Maybe you don't have a record. We want to protect your record, protect your ability to get employment. You can go in on either a diversion or intervention in lieu type track. That is, you're going to go into this program. If you're successful, not only have you gotten through a program without additional punishment, but we will actually dismiss your case and seal your record. So those are from the criminal the case standpoint, it's, you have a case, you got in trouble. Perhaps it's something where we don't really want to mess up your future and where you are. That's great, we'll take advantage of that. Or you've been in trouble a lot, your record may be not as much, but we need to get you where you're stopping getting in trouble. But it really is diagnosis driven, same with the addiction court. It's a treatment counselor who really makes a diagnosis. So it's like anything else, it's diagnostic driven. You have to see the right professional. We try and be evidence-based, and we also try and be diagnostic-based rather than just me. I like to think I know everything, but really I need a professional that tells me this is the illness and this is the right way to go, and this is where the evidence leads for the best treatment.
Judge Loftus, could you address maybe from the, I know you had some experience in the juvenile court system.
Right. I concur that, in fact, you need to have a diagnostic element of this. We, in juvenile court, we began a policy of screening every juvenile that came into the juvenile hall to see whether or not there was an underlying mental health issue in order to identify that and see if whether or not we could address those issues as part of the way we dealt with juveniles. Because in juvenile court, the idea is rehabilitation, and that's what we're trying to seek. So if you have a mental health problem there, we try to divert them to the mental health system as opposed to having them be in the justice system. That same thing is true in every other court. You have to, usually the defense attorney in a criminal case will say, I just have a doubt as to whether or not this person understands what's going on and is able to help me defend them in court, and therefore we end up with an evaluation by usually a psychologist or two, and sometimes three, who try to determine whether or not the person is in fact mentally ill. And if the person is mentally ill, then we have to take that into account in the way we address the issues that they have. We use that same thing in other courts as well with regard to addiction. We have what we call juvenile dependency courts, where we deal with the question of whether or not parents are appropriate to raise their children, or whether or not they need to become wards of the state. We also diagnose people there that are mentally ill and give them, hopefully, an avenue so that they can keep their children and be able to raise their children, or if they have addiction problems, the same kind of thing. So you have to have a diagnosis by a professional in order for the judge to be able to make a determination as to which way to proceed, and to tie them into the right resources. And that is usually where we run into problems. The number of resources, the availability of resources for people to be able to be treated in the system.
And anything to add from the new day court perspective? Judge
We
Stormer?
get all of our people directly from the hospital, so we don't have to worry too much about diagnosis. They're usually first responders are called. In Ohio, there's something called the fifth criteria, where a family member can actually sign an affidavit to have a family member probated, but nobody ever does it. They wait till the person is very, very ill, and by the time they get the person to our system, they have to be hospitalized. So we see people within 14 days upon release from the hospital. But gentlemen, do you take only seriously mentally ill in your courts, or do you take PTSD as well?
We take anything.
You take PTSD, do you?
Oh, yeah, our mental health court would take anything.
Take PTSD, yeah. Because of the nature of the statutes in Ohio, I only take people who could be hospitalized, which is the same things I told you about before, schizophrenia, et cetera.
And I see we have a question from the audience, and I have a couple here that are written down, but I want to follow up on the criteria. Are there any disqualifying offenses or diagnoses or other characteristics that would prevent someone from being admitted into a mental health court, or maybe not so much with the new day court?
No, I'm limited.
You're limited as well,
Yeah.
okay.
We would definitely look at the charges, and there are some charges of a violent nature that may do it. As I talked about, you have different tracks you may get in on, so sometimes if you've tried a program before and anywhere in the state, you might be not eligible for one type of entry. But generally, it's charge-based, and a lot of violent crimes don't make it. We try and open the door to that as much as we can, but there are some statutes and other guiding documents that say no. And so it is. It depends how you got there.
In California, there's a brand-new statute that was just passed, effective July the 1st of this year, in which if someone comes to the court, and there are very few exclusions, murder and certain sex offenses, but other than that, anything is possible. If the judge determines after an evaluation, and there's a hearing as to the evaluation, that the reason the person committed the criminal offense was because of their mental illness, the judge can, on his own motion, defer that person to the mental health system and supervise them for a period of 2 years. And if they successfully complete it, the judge has the discretion at that point to dismiss their case on any kind of criminal conviction. It's a new idea. We in California sometimes are a little bit ahead of other people, sometimes off the beam. But nonetheless, we're going to find out how that works and how that's going to proceed. But as the judge said, there are certain limited exclusions, but not very many. So we'll see how that works out.
All right, Dr. Palmer, question?
Yeah, hi, thank you for being here. My question is sort of a follow-up on these references to criminal cases. What protections are there for those who appear before your court from the constitutional rights and protection from self-incrimination as you're having these chats?
I'm sort of laughing because it's a great question. But once you get arrested, you do have the right to due process, but you don't have the right to not have probation. So you don't have the right to pick your sentence. You don't have the right to avoid coercive treatment, no matter what type of treatment it is. And so I'm not, to me, the question, as you all out here, probably most of you have never been arrested, but once you get arrested and you get in our system, we can get your medical records. We don't have HIPAA problems. You know, we're not a treatment provider. We can, talk about you in public because, yeah, we're not a HIPAA provider. So some of the things that you think of as constitutional rights just don't continue to attach once you've been charged with a crime. Am I oversimplifying that, judges?
No.
I think you're right on there. As far as protection due process, we continue with that. If you want to be this specialized court and certified in Ohio, you have to have the availability of a public defender or a defense attorney as well as a prosecutor at your team meeting. There are due process rights with any violation before sanction. We're an off-the-record court, which means you can talk to us all you want. We're not going to use it against you. It's kind of like,
Right.
Talk to us now, because you don't want to talk to us in open court. You talk to us in open court, that's on the record. You have all the protections you've always had on a probation violation, which are lesser than your original crime. Yes, you're on probation. So the standard's different to find you violated probation, but you can talk to us here. But if we are going to issue a sanction, generally, we've already talked about in team with the defense counsel, and defense counsel will talk to you individually. You have the right to ask for representation before I talk to you during that. If I'm going to give you a sanction, you can talk to that attorney privately. He or she, that attorney, can speak on your behalf before your sanction. Obviously, then we would transfer from my court to final punishment if necessary, if you're terminated and you have another right to counsel.
In California, there's rights that people have. When you are mentally ill, you still have the same constitutional rights as everyone else. And there are situations in which people sometimes are discovered to be mentally ill once they're incarcerated, they're in jail or prison, and there's a statute that permits the district attorney to petition to keep the person in custody even after they've finished their sentence because they are dangerous for the community. They have a right to a jury trial as to whether or not they continue to constitute a danger, and of course you have experts that testify about it then, but they have the right to petition and say, I think I'm okay to get out of custody of the state hospital, but if in fact the expertise and the jury trial determines that they're not, then they stay in. If they determine that they're safe to leave, they can go out of the community.
Judge Stormer, is the standard a little different in Ohio when it comes to that determination?
Well, I think I was just sort of thinking about what you were saying. That's very interesting. We don't have anything like that,
No.
so I can't really compare it. But in New Day, to really be very focused, it's a civil process. It's not a criminal process. So you can only be hospitalized. You can't be held in custody, although we do have crisis intervention trained police officers who will go get you if you've been ordered to treatment and take you to treatment. But you have the right to a lawyer at various points in that. So the civil commitment's a little bit different. I can't imagine having a jury trial and whether or not we'd have to have civil commitment. I know there are other states that do that. Michigan, for example, you have to have a jury trial within 14 days, which I don't even know how anybody does that. Anybody else who's a judge here, you're going, wow, I have to assemble a jury in 14 days, and you have to be ready to try it in 14 days. It'd be very hard.
So just so the audience knows, Judge Stormer in Ohio, you would make that decision?
Yes, I would make that decision, not a jury.
Okay. So,
Jury trials are sometimes very interesting when the defendant testifies about how they think they're not mentally ill. The defense attorneys typically try to talk them out of that.
That's true.
I did have one person who insisted upon testifying and said that he clearly was capable because he had time traveled into the future to find himself to be fine. didn't take the jury too long to
That's a good
determine
defense.
that he needed to stay in the hospital.
That's a very good.
All right, now, I have many written questions from the audience that we're going to attempt to address. And this question, I'm going to change it a little bit. The question as written is, how many addicts that you encounter are the result of overprescribing by doctors? And I think maybe the question that I would like to ask that touches upon this, or do you oftentimes find that people who come before you are there because they're not properly taking their meds, or they haven't figured the right formula relative to the medications? What's your experience in that regard?
You looking at me?
Any of the
Oh,
judges?
I know. I try not to deal with, opiates right now. I'm going to let others deal with opiates.
We don't generally ask. Sometimes I'll ask them, how'd you get started? But they're so deep into it that it's not. I mean, as you know, yes, the pill problem started a heroin problem because it created demand, and there are people out there that will fill demand, and they're really switching to meth and other things as well because you're all paying attention to opioids.
Yep.
The deaths aren't going to go down. I mean, it's still up there, but there's a whole environment of getting these drugs out, what's cheap, what's easy. Once you're in the addicted mindset, I think you really start to lose control of it doesn't matter how you got started, but obviously the pain pills, the idea of pain as a vital sign, the idea of we have a safe pill that's derived from a pill that's been addicted, from a process that's been addicting people for thousands of years. You probably all know that history, and there we are. So we're trying to deal with them. I mean, it's quite fascinating to me. It's the whole darn family. I get people in there, I mean, their whole family's using, their family's offering them pills. I mean, all these, this person gave me this person, and we got to send them home. I can get them better almost. I send them home, and mom's yelling at them, and mom and dad, and everyone's using that they know. Their whole lifestyle's built around substance use and self-medication with marijuana, and how do you take care of yourself? I continue to learn. It's a continued thing. The opiate problem is bad. Pills, again, I think it opened the door to demand. You can hear a lot more about that from others. But generally, they're pretty well into addiction that they're going to grab any substance they want at the point we're dealing with them and trying to get them out of the addicted mindset, more importantly.
All right, this is a question that was directed to Judge Stormer, and it deals with veterans that you might deal with in your court. So what do you do when you have a veteran with a mental illness who ends up in court, but it is not eligible for your program? Would there be such a case?
Well, there would be potentially, but if I get people, everybody I get is from the hospital. So if they hospitalize, and we're piloting, segueing people charged with crimes from the criminal forensic side into the civil side at the jail. So instead of sitting for a month before you go to a hospital bed, we're trying to get you quicker. We are picking up some veterans, but there is a veterans treatment court in Summit County. So if they're charged with a crime, and it's very behavioral health oriented. One thing I can say that I'd just like to add to what the judge just said, these courts are hard. And he hit on one of the hardest things. If I went to any of you and said, look, if you want to stay out of jail, you can't go back home. You can't see your family. You got to dump your girlfriend. You're not going to see your mom. These are very difficult processes, and we are there to support them as they go through it. But these are not some kind of softy, hey, come on, we're going to love you out of addiction. These are difficult cases where they have to work really hard to stop using, to change their lives, or in my court, to take the right medicine, and sometimes their parents are very complicit in how they've ended up in the hospital. So if you're thinking out there, gee, isn't that nice, all these judges are so sweet, we're really not actually that sweet. We're actually kind of, tough like your mom should have been, maybe, but I'm sorry, I just wanted to add that.
And then there was a follow-up question, and any of the judges who might have some experience with this. How do you connect a veteran to the mental health services? And I think this probably segues to another question that I had for you, is the makeup of your teams. I'm going to call them the teams. I think Judge Werren referred to them as the teams who help through the courts to treat these individuals. So if you could address that topic, please.
In our court, we have a calendar that we call the Veterans Court, and we have the Veterans Administration come to court, and they sit in the courtroom, and as the judge reviews the case, and the issues that are involved in the case, and the veteran's eligibility is reviewed there, and they're plugged into the veteran's benefits right there in court. If for some reason they're not eligible or determined to not be eligible for the right kind of services, then the court shifts that case back onto the regular calendar so that they can get the kind of therapeutic intervention that they need so that they're not out of it. They do this court twice a month, and they bring in the Veterans Administration that sits in the courtroom with the judge and says, okay, we can provide these kind of services for this individual, and the court then orders that individual to go to those services and come back and report back to them as to whether or not they were successful.
Yeah, Judge Heath runs a veterans court, and they're real strong, not only once you're there on a felony charge for veterans, but they have a whole mentorship program. So you have other veterans who come in, and they're going to mentor one-on-one. They come to every court with you. They go to everything you want with you, and that's been a tremendous benefit. That's a whole broad range of what kind of treatment's necessary. Differing people have different issues, and it's not focused on one issue. It's focused on whatever is helping veterans, but it uses very much a veterans helping veterans approach in that court. At the municipal court, we were trying to remain as much aware as we can of veterans and their issues. And again, we'd like to be a helping court, and I think we try to be, and especially our probation officers. It's where's going to be the best treatment. Yes, you're a veteran, so we can get your VA benefits. I have some veterans. Okay, how about your treatment instead of ComQuest? I can get the VA to pay for it. You want to go through the VA? Great. Let's use every benefit available to you. So we're always probing to do that.
All right, and so the audience has an understanding of just how many must be involved in the system to make these courts work. Can you break down the teams? In other words, I know, Judge Stormer, you have quite a few collaborative agencies who assist you. If you could just give this audience an idea of really how many different agencies and entities are involved in these programs so that the participants can receive seamless services, to the best
Well, that's the goal.
possible. That is the goal, isn't it?
We had a number of stakeholders help us form our courts. So some of the same people were involved when we did the criminal mental health court in 2000. But I am always jealous of people who have teams. Our court is very low cost because we always get started without any funding. My team is me, and I have a person who I pay to help be a liaison to the agency. So we rely on outside agencies. We don't really have team meetings. We collect information, partly because I've just been doing it for a long time, I suppose. But we work with one entity. It's called Community Support Services because that's who our ADM board has appointed to take care of this. They assign case managers, and we have the case managers appear in court. But when we formed the court, it was NAMI. Are there anybody from NAMI here? Anybody? Okay. Huge help to us. You saw Leslie talking about NAMI's role. They are a tremendous advocate for us. And frankly, do you use NAMI in your mental health court? Do they come in and help you? I mean, they're huge advocates for their family, and they still appear in court and help us. But we don't have a team because we can't afford a team, and I'm really jealous of your team, Judge.
Well, it helps to have funding. State put out a lot of funding for opioid addiction, which also, because there's medication for that, it works with alcohol. So alcohol and opioid diagnoses will get more funding than other addictions, for better or for worse. But we were able to build a team. ComQuest is as part of our team. They're formally part of the team, but as far as agencies and around we're using, everyone around mental illness. We're using NAMI and TASC and communities, Coleman, Phoenix Rising, but in the addiction court, Phoenix Rising, Phoenix House, can't keep them all straight, couple Colemans, TASC, ICANN, NAMI for information, foundations, great local programs. We try and use everyone we can. We have someone from the mental health board on our committee, that's Erin Ivers, and I look to her because at least with the mental health board, they've done audits, so I really trust the programs that they fund because I already know someone else is looking at them. How do I know what's a good program or not? But pretty much if a client or defendant comes to us and says, I'm involved here, we're going to support that as well. But our team approach is ComQuest, probation officers, and the Mental Health Recovery Board.
Thank you. And just so you understand, in some of these courts, they're structured differently, the teams. the teams always consist of course, first and foremost, the judge has to be involved. And that, I believe studies have found that the involvement of a judge in these sessions with these participants really is one of the keys to success. Also on that team, usually a representative from the prosecution side, a representative from the defense side. You heard about probation officers, oftentimes a case manager, mental health treatment provider, substance abuse treatment provider, and other community resource persons. So it really does take a village. But I do think, and I would like one of the judges to address this, if you would, that the statistics show that the involvement of the judge and the involvement of that team on either weekly or monthly basis with these participants really is what makes the difference. Anyone care to address that?
Well, there have been studies out of Duke University that established what we would call the Black-Robe Effect. And I think there's some huge percentage of shift, because even if you're mentally ill, you're not stupid, and you grew up in America mostly. And so what do you see? Who's in charge on television? Who's in charge in Law and Order movies, Perry Mason? Pick an era, pick a show. You know, a judge is always treated with respect. So people bring that with them when they come to court. You know, even the most ill individual, when you say, "Where do you know where you are?" They go, "Yeah, I'm in a court." Well, they know that, and it can be used to our advantage. I hope we all take full advantage of the fact that we get to sit up a little bit higher, and they have to listen to us. And that has been empirically established through a series of studies that it really makes a difference for people.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's great. There was only one time it didn't work, and that's where we had one client in the mental health court, or every time the judge would start talking about corrective behavior, he would become the president of the United States and say, "You're in the Oval Office and you won't talk to me this way." So it works 90% of the time. But yeah, I agree with that Black-Robe Effect. I don't know why, but they want to, if I can praise someone, they take that praise with greater weight, and they know that I could sanction them. I'm not the professional, I'm not the specialist, I'm not the counselor. But if I tell the client what that counselor told me, it has a benefit.
As I mentioned earlier, it takes a certain amount of courage for a judge to assume this role. And unless a judge wants to do the work, this kind of work, that's hard work, that has a certain element of risk to it in terms of trusting people to do what they need to do, it's not going to be successful. It's important. The judge's role is crucial to make these kind of courts work.
But I'm going to say, in fairness to us, at least for me, I should only speak for myself, it's one of the most fun things you can ever do as a judge. It's so satisfying, don't you agree, judges, to have people who could barely talk to you show up several weeks later, and they're clean and they're neat, and you know they're not strung out or they're on their mental health. We don't get to see the results a lot. We make decisions and we don't get to see what happens next. And these courts give us, I think, a lot of satisfaction because you watch people get better, they bring their children. I haven't been a drug court judge for years and years and years now, and people still drop by in probate court and say, "Hey, I want you to know my son just graduated from college." And you know, you remember them when they were brought into court when they were 2 and you were threatening to take the child from the mother. So it really makes it all worthwhile, I suppose.
Indeed, and those graduations are special too.
They
It's a
are.
very gratifying moment to see that some of these people who've never really accomplished anything or ever been rewarded or applauded have that moment where they receive that certificate and they said, "I've done it. I've done this." And so it is very gratifying. Yes, we have a question from the audience. While the microphone's, while you're walking the microphone out, I'm going to ask another written question. We have a couple here. Is there ever actual conversation and communication between court personnel and the doctors who diagnose and prescribe medications? And I think that we touched upon it in this team approach where I think the judges let the experts and the physicians and the treatment providers really take the lead in that respect. So anyone care to further address that topic?
I mean, you're talking about, like, does the judge get mad about a doctor that...
No, they just want to know if there's a collaborative, I believe, a collaborative approach to this. In other words...
Yeah, the answer is yes. I thought maybe there's some... some judges have a give and take between the current, especially in the opioid field, using medication. I thought maybe you're going there, but again, I like to play doctor, but I'm not the doctor, and you have to be able to let go and say, okay, that's what's prescribed, that's what the evidence says, that's the best practice, let's go with it.
We do encourage people when they're having lots of side effects, though, to talk to their doctor. And interestingly, and you may experience this also, that they will tell the judge things that they won't tell their doctor. And our response is always, gee, it would be great if you talked to your doctor about that, and I'm giving you permission to do that, and you really need to. And so the collaboration for us comes through the patient, and sometimes the doctors will really, start to think about it a little bit more because the patient has respectfully said, I'm having an issue.
A question from the audience.
Yes, this question comes from a board member's perspective with one of the local agencies. So assuming we have a client who's willing to work with you and us as an organization, is there anything that our organizations can do to help you quicken the process, get people into care? What is there any missing link that you guys are seeing right now?
You asking me, Eric? So what could ComQuest do better? You want to?
Any organization.
Any organization.
No, we have a lot of frustrations, but usually between the court and the agencies that we're working with, it's a shared frustration. It's a funding frustration. It's a place to go frustration. It's a place to put them in frustration. It's, why aren't they behaving the way we want them to? And a frustration maybe on the higher end, state laws and other things, but not with the agency. I mean, in my case, we have the clients. We're finding them through the court, and we're taking them to you. The agency say, what can we do? Come on, get them. Let's help. We're usually taking that way, and I find most people pretty responsive. I know it takes time, and the courts sometimes drag their feet because my biggest issue is I see them right away, and I'm like, okay, let's start getting them help. Well, they're still innocent, and I really shouldn't be getting involved, and I want you to get involved in that time period too, and I don't have the authority yet. But I'm not going to complain about the agencies that serve us.
Participation by the agencies, I believe, is absolutely key. The judges can encourage, but they can't obviously prescribe. They can't diagnose. They can say, I think this person has some sort of an issue and we need to get them connected to the right providers. But it's absolutely key to making these courts work. And I think that's what you're hearing from these judges.
Can I add one thing? One thing everyone can do is to educate the community about the stigma and why it's a misperception. And all those things that stigma is based upon that I talked about, the misperceptions and why they are misperceptions, and the fact that mental illness is an illness, addiction is an illness, and they're both treatable, and people can be successful. That has to change in our society for all those other things to happen, for resources to be made available, for the approach of the community to be different than it is today.
All right.
That poor man, he wants to ask a question.
Okay, we have another written question, and then we'll go to the audience right after this one. Judge Stormer mentioned the large percentage of women with PTSD who are in jail and prisons, but and she also mentioned that day court isn't for them because that's obviously outside of that criminal justice system. Is there a court or resource for these women, that is the women who are in jail and in prisons and who suffer from PTSD?
I wish there were. It's really what I think in the vernacular is trauma-informed counseling, which is, we dealt with a lot of prostitutes in Akron many years ago, and almost all of them had been victims of family of origin or nearby people, had been sexually and physically abused and ended up with PTSD. Socioeconomic status was low, no treatment available as a young girl, ended up on cocaine, ended up prostituting themselves to get cocaine, but prostituting themselves wasn't a big stretch because they'd already been sexually abused. We had a huge cohort. But at the time, we didn't have trauma-informed counseling even as a concept. But there are now some courts that are becoming trauma-informed in the sense that anytime a woman is there, they're going to do the analysis on PTSD. We do have people in my court who are PTSD diagnosed as well as mentally ill. All of them have been sexually traumatized everyone who has a PTSD diagnosis, that's where it came from. So we are trying to encourage them to get, specific trauma-informed counseling. And I mean, most of your drug addicts, if you look at many of your women, I think it's changed now with the heroin thing has altered it a little bit because you have different people coming in. But it used to be cocaine, meth, it was almost all family of origin issues.
Yeah, I think we're all learning. You probably know more than we do, and we're always trying to keep abreast of it. And I think if you want to educate the public, that's the other areas. The whole idea of trauma-informed care and adverse childhood events and trauma and complex traumas and complex trauma syndromes, everything has to be informed by that. And I think from the most courts, and certainly our agencies are informing us, that's how we need to keep up with things. So whether you're diagnosed with PTSD or not, you're going to be eligible for our mental health court. For a lot of them, we have agencies that filter, that screen at the jail. I mean, if you're involved in the criminal justice system, someone is probably trying to look, whether we catch it, whether we don't. But obviously, as trauma is going to be part of the care.
Thank you. Now, we'll take another question from the audience.
That guy has got to ask his question. He is, only because he's right in front of me, and he's been raising his hand for about 5 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, we'll go
Thank you.
with this
And
gentleman.
I haven't
Yeah.
seen you, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. We're
better be a good
switching
question.
moderators. All right. So we'll hear from you, sir, and then this gentleman who's patiently waiting up front will be next.
Thank you very much. Research has in general shown that the age range from 15 to 25 is the age range most prone to engage in violent behavior. That's also the age range that tends to be most treatment resistant, and it tends to be the age range that a lot of practitioners and folks almost shy away from to try to deal with. They also tend to be the age range that has the fewest community supports and family supports available to them. I'm just wondering, that age range of 15 to 25, do you have any thoughts about how we can better service that population?
Come on,
Who wants to answer that question?
The juvenile judge should be talking about.
And while you're thinking about that, there is another question from the audience that sort of touches upon that, and that is, what can be done in our schools to identify mental illness or addictive personalities so that those students, eventually as they go into adulthood, can live happier and more productive lives. So I think those are sort of related.
Yeah, I mean, I
questions.
guess in thinking about it a little, I think the first answer I would give you is you're informed, and I don't think most parents are, and I think that's where it starts. And when you're raising a child, to understand that the brain doesn't form and complete its formation until you're 25, that your more likelihood of adult addiction comes from earlier use. Parents don't think that way. We put them in car seats and we protected the heck out of them, and they get to be about 15 and we're kind of like, well, I was fine when I was their age. I drank, I did whatever, it's okay. And we stop keeping abreast of these changes in our knowledge. I mean, our brain science is very, very minimal, but we have to keep educating ourselves, keep growing, keep learning, so we can get there. And I understand what you're saying. I think I understand what you're saying. That is that troubling age. But I think all of us as a society have kind of like, well, that's what kids go through. That's the way it is. And it's going to take a long change in education to say, listen, that brain is still forming. They look like big adults, but they're not. And that's the whole, you change laws, you change everything if we all thought the same way about where the brain is. A lot of things would be different. And I think it's going to take generational shifts to get there. But a court such as our court, yeah, we look at agencies that deal with people in those age ranges. We look at them differently in their diagnosis when they're young. I have a young gentleman that I'm struggling mightily with, and he's just coming out right around that age group. His brother died of an opioid addiction, and he's constantly using heroin, and it seems so counterintuitive. But at that young brain, we have to understand he's in a different brain mindset. He wants to experience what his brother went through. I don't know why, and I can't get through to him.
Is he 19?
Yeah,
19 is the biggest age group for participation in the criminal justice system. We have more 19-year-old men than any other single age group. There's something that happens, and maybe the guys are going, yeah, I know what happens because I was 19, but I don't really understand it. But it's a terrible age. I think we have to start treating these things as public health issues. And if you brought the majesty of the public health system in to educate kids starting at a young age, you don't smoke, right? Smoking is dropped. You don't drink and drive. Drinking and driving is dropped. But we don't talk about, as much taking care of yourself mentally or avoiding pain pills. We have a lot of athletes who end up, their kids, I don't know if you saw that in your juvenile court, but, they get torn, some muscle, they want to go play, they get doped up. It's just like the NFL, but they're kids. So I think we really have to start thinking of it as a public health issue and not a criminal justice issue.
All right, and then we'll take this question from this gentleman now from the audience.
This question is for all three. I have some experience with some friends that went through the Chance program. I don't know what the success rate is today, but I know years ago it was very low, that for every, I don't know, and this is just guessing, 50 people, maybe one or two of them passed the program. My question is there is it a case-by-case protocol, or is there a set protocol for people that go into these programs to, I guess what I'm getting at, is it like a 3 strikes you're out? Is it, are they getting violated for dirty urines, or is it numerous dirty urines? Or I know from being an active user and being in recovery, being forced into recovery, so to speak, is kind of unrealistic. And I know a lot of the people that are going through the programs, yes, there are some people that are serious, but there are also some of those folks that are at home trying to find out ways to get by the urine tests and how to tell you what you want to hear, so that they can get through this program. And a lot of them have reservations of using once they pass. And I mean, I've talked to many of them that says, as soon as I get that graduation paper, I'm going out and smoking a joint, So I guess what I'm asking is how many chances do they get? Is it case by case? Is it?
It's a graduated sanction system. Chance program's a change, too, over the years. That's the felony court system. It was run by a magistrate. Now it's run by a judge. The Supreme Court has said other criteria to help all our courts along. They're starting to recognize some of the benefits of medically assisted treatment. But to answer your question, in our court, in all specialized dockets, you have to go to the graduated sanction system. Okay, you didn't report in on time. All right, write me an essay. Okay, you didn't report in on time. Okay, you're going to spend a day with us. Okay, you didn't report in time. How about some community service? Oh, you didn't report. I mean, we're going to keep going. You eventually will get terminated. I spend my weeks going over this same speech. Quit letting these little things get in the way of your big victories. You didn't show up for your meetings, yet you've been, 100 days of sobriety. And it's very frustrating. But you can get terminated for little things if you let it go. But no, first, on an addiction court, you drug screen twice a week or 3. It's a random drug screening. If you violate, sometimes I feel like I'm the only one in the room saying this, and I feel like I'm supposed to be the tough guy, but you can't punish for an addiction, right? For an illness, right? It's your illness. But we're a court. You failed. We're on you. No, so we do therapeutic adjustments, so, okay, you're in outpatient, maybe we'll increase it to intensive outpatient. Maybe we're going to see the counsel more often. You're doing 2 meetings a week, go to 4. We're trying to do that, and we really do try and draw a line between, is this a symptom or is this a behavior? And we try and punish the behaviors and not the symptoms. I can't speak for every court. That's the way you want to be. We can sit and talk about theory and the best evidence, but in the day-to-day process, we're looking at a person, we're dealing with them and what their issues are. And of course, people come and lie to me all day long. I know that. So what?
Yep.
It's my job. And I'm going to deal with your lie. You're going to create your own problems with that lie, and I'll let it happen, right? I mean, I can't tell you how the last person, we had someone do marijuana, and they're like, well, I was at a party, and I had some chicken.
Yeah, exactly.
You tested positive because of the chicken at your friend's party? Okay, whatever.
My favorite was the woman who tested positive for cocaine because she had sex with a guy who had been using cocaine. It's like, yeah, that didn't happen. So there you go. It's,
Yeah.
I mean, the lies are elaborate. You talk about your friends coming up with these lies. There's not a lie that you could come up with that the 3 of us haven't heard at least once.
Yeah.
You know
I want to
what
just...
we give you the rope. You can hang yourself or you can tie a
Right.
bow.
And I want to just add to the response to that gentleman's question is you have to understand that The judges who are involved in these programs are involved because they want to be involved. They are not mandated to be involved in these programs. And the team members are involved in these programs not because they are forced to become involved, it's because they want to be. So the whole mindset of the team, of the judge, of the probation officers, of the attorneys, of the treatment providers, is to help a person succeed. They want to see a successful outcome. And so it really is disappointing for the team when the outcome isn't successful. They're just as disappointed as the participant. So really, we should, I think, support our judges and their teams as they try to come up with creative ways to help people who have particular needs, very unique needs, in addressing those needs so that they can be productive members of our society. And with that, I want to thank each of our panelists.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I eat a piece of chicken. I love it.
Couldn't be any other.